I am quite confident that the point of life is not to build your life around a job.
Oh, wake up, rethink the status quo. When you get your money right, then you're the one who runs your life. Come build a wealthy spirit with Sammie and Michelle.
Sammie, I am so excited to share our interview with Paul Millerd of the Pathless Path from last year. It was our most popular episode of Build a Wealthy Spirit last year.
I love this conversation because it's just really inspiring to hear people who go on a path different from the norm. Paul was, like many people, did all the right things and got a typical corporate job in consulting. And then he shifted and he moved towards what he valued, and that has led to his beautiful life that he's living now.
Exactly. His story is super inspiring, not only because he was doing this a lot earlier than a lot of people. Like now it's super, super relevant because you just had, again, big layoffs for companies like across tech. Like Google just did another round of layoffs. And I think people are really starting to question whether or not they want to continue on the corporate path, if they want to take a break like a sabbatical, or if they want to just do something different, something that's more aligned to their own values. Something that we really believe here at Build a Wealthy Spirit. And Paul is one of the people who walked that path first and also is just so supportive of my work, of your journey, of almost anyone who follows him and engages with him. He's so supportive of helping people find their way. So it was great chatting with him. This interview was so fun. And I'm excited to share it with anybody who's maybe in their job, feeling a little burnt out, feeling a little unsatisfied, wondering if there's a different version of what they can do. I think this conversation helps inspire a lot of people. In fact, 2 people who listen to this podcast have since left their jobs and went on a sabbatical. So I know it's a very powerful episode.
Let's get into the conversation. Today we're talking to Paul Millerd about his book, The Pathless Path.
Sammie, I'm so excited to have Paul on our podcast today. Paul and I met through his wife, Angie, who did Rite of Passage with me. She was one of my first friends in the course. And Paul is super interesting. He's author of The Pathless Path, and he talks a little bit about his journey going from the default path, from working in consulting, being in business school, and how he ended up finding himself just going through different life experiences and eventually choosing this, what he has now called the Pathless Path. The book resonated so much with Sammie and I. We've been telling everyone about it. If you're our friends, you know we've been pushing it. But we're so excited that Paul agreed to come on our podcast today. He's done a lot of other cool stuff in the meantime. He writes the Boundless newsletter. He has created a group for other Pathless Path people called Find the Others, which I'm a part of. And so we're just really excited to dig a little bit deeper and learn more about his own experiences. So Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Excited to be here. I've been inspired by you guys creating 100 episodes of this show and also your newsletter, Michelle. So excited to dive in.
Thank you. I'm trying to get Sammie on the newsletter chain too, getting her writing out there.
I know. I'm like, ooh, these newsletters are cool. I didn't even know you could just have a newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, that's the internet now, right? I think this was my realization in 2015. Oh, you can just share your ideas and you might radically improve your life. And then I sort of just followed that for 7 years, and here we are.
Well, we're very grateful for it. I think especially since I've been launching on my own creator journey, launching the podcast, launching my writing. It's been super helpful having people to look to who have been doing it. The people who you bring on your podcast, a lot of them have been on this journey for a while as well. And it just makes such a difference. I spent 2 years feeling like nobody was doing anything similar to me, and it's very lonely. And so I'm super happy that we were able to find your work.
Yes, me too. And we are super excited to dig into it today, especially Paul's journey. I think a lot of you listeners are going to find it very relatable. It, I think, aligns very well with what we talk about on the podcast. And I was just shocked to see how many parallels there were. And it really is just nice to read about somebody who, for me, is already ahead on that path and what that journey looks like. So yeah, we're really excited to talk about that. Before we get into your whole journey, I wanted to ask you about a quote that you have, because Michelle and I both really resonated with this quote. It's a quote from David Foster Wallace. I'll read it for the listeners. It says, "I think that the ultimate way you get lucky is if you have some success early in life. You get to find out early it doesn't mean anything, which means you get to start early the work of figuring out what does mean something." When I heard that, I just thought about us, I thought about our listeners, and I thought it was so relatable. And I wanted to ask you, like, what did you feel when you read that quote?
Yeah, so I sort of felt like I was always being gaslit going through my life. My first internship, I write about this in the book, of sorting through this box looking for records of Amelia Earhart. This was given to me by the vice president of the company, and people would be like, "Oh, wow, getting a project from the vice president, that's a pretty big deal." And I'm going through this box, page after page. It probably took me 2 weeks to go through 4 or 5 boxes. There's no records to be found. I found some random interesting things, but I'm just thinking, what am I doing here? Right? Adults are telling me, "Oh, you're getting good experience. You should be grateful for what you're doing." The grown men working in my group were saying similar things like, "Oh, you're getting good experience. You're so lucky to have this internship." And I'm just wondering, what the are all these adults doing, spending their time like this? And if you question things like this, you get put down and insulted by older people, especially older men. You're just naive. You're young. You'll learn. You got to put in your work. You got to pay your dues. And it just kept reoccurring, right? In every job I had, there was always at least a certain amount of nonsense you're expected to do. And you're not allowed to question, "Oh, why are we working so many weeks of the year? Why aren't we working less hours?" And it's just sort of this area you don't question. And for a large amount of time in the 20th century, and even the last 23 years of this century, most people have just gone along with it. So I've just been questioning it and saying, well, what the heck are we doing here? What are we doing as adults on this earth? Are we really meant to be working in these jobs, especially as some people are earning far more than they ever need? Like, what is the point of all this? And I'm just the crazy one that sort of blew up my life to go and find out.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I think it's funny because we spend so much of our life trying to get to a certain job title or a certain company or school or whatever it is. And the earlier that you get there, the more you realize that it's the same BS everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not necessarily more important. It's not necessarily more valuable. Maybe it is, depending on your work. But it's just, a lot of times there's a lot of noise, and they just want to keep telling you that this is important, what you're doing is important, so that, like, your ego is attached to the job title. And I think, like, the sooner you have that realization, and I think you almost have to taste success to have that realization. Like, it's hard for people to tell you that before you get there. But yeah, the sooner you have that realization, the sooner you can start to make a hard right and be like, okay, I think it's time to start questioning this.
Yeah, I think there's a certain aspect of youth and not knowing what you're doing. I think we all have the desire, especially driven people, to prove ourselves, right? And society only offers so many paths to pick from, or at least the illusion that there are only so many paths to pick from. The reality, especially with the internet, is that more paths than ever before are possible. And this is even true within careers. Most people graduating from college track into a certain number of paths, but as soon as you spend a few years in the workforce, you realize, oh wow, there are many different ways to make a living. And what keeps people in the paths is they basically just look around at what other people are doing and keep staying in those worlds, because the fact is, transforming your life, making a life transition, all these things is really freaking hard.
Yeah.
I did it in my 30s, and I play around with this idea of the longer you stay in a path that isn't yours, the longer it takes to move to a path that might feel like something that's yours. So people always say to me, oh, you have all the experience and luck of having all these background and credentials. And what they don't see is I've sort of fumbled around for 4 years after leaving my job trying to figure it out. And it was really confusing, hard, embarrassing, shameful, all these things. And that's kind of what I wanted to write about. And that's what really fed to me wanting to write the book, and just basically put my heart out there and say, here's what it was actually like. It sucked, and it's also worth it.
I think that's what really resonated to me when reading your book is I felt very similar. I think if you look at someone's like endpoint, which I don't even think I'm there yet, but if you look at someone's endpoint, you can say, well, you're making money, you're doing okay. And that happened yesterday. Like you quit your job, this worked out. And I do have a lot of faith that things can work out for people or they can test something new. But it's so hard to balance that tension of it's not easy. And there's a lot of like introspection and self-doubt that comes with it. But at the same time, it can definitely be worth it. But you have to go through a little bit of that internal struggle first.
Yeah, and I think this gets back to some of the underlying assumptions that sort of guide how we think about work. A lot of people start with the assumption that the whole point of life is finding a job and building your life around that. I sort of reject that. I want to go even more base level of like, what is the point of life? I am quite confident that the point of life is not to build your life around a job. These modern full-time jobs with benefits and cushy lives have only existed for less than 100 years. It can't be that this is the point of life. However, that does not lay out what is the point of life, right? And that is ultimately the question people have struggled with for thousands of years. And almost everyone's conclusion is there are no easy answers. But when you leave your job, one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to basically match the job scripts. And everyone will ask you, what's your plan to make money? Are you going to monetize? Are you going to do these things? And I think that people basically need to be lost for a certain amount of time in order to be found. Now, I've seen the full range, people doing that in jobs. I think for me, I needed to sort of escape the world I was in to find myself. And there's all different flavors of it. And I sort of was disappointed with how many other people there were sharing their story and how many playbooks there were. So I was like, I need to write one of these books, but I hope there are 99 more of these in 10 years, which is sort of something I'm inspired to help create. And I hope both of you write and share about your story too.
Yeah, we hope so too. And when I read, like when I hear your path and like even just the Pathless Path in general, I'm like, wow, like he's so brave, you know, like I'm not like that. But then in your book, what I like is you talk about being a world-class hoop jumper. And I'm like, oh, that's me. I think that's a lot of us. Like we actually train ourselves to jump through these hoops to get to where we're supposedly supposed to be. Where did you first get this like notion of being a world-class hoop jumper? Like, where do you think that started?
So I have an interesting background in that there's a lot of people who are very driven and successful that sort of grew up in the soup of success, both driven by their parents and or the world they're in, right? They go to fancy schools. It's reinforced by their parents, sometimes not. I didn't grow up with that. I grew up in a small rural town in the east side of Connecticut. I had no idea what fancy careers people did. Most people had pretty like solid middle-class jobs, but nobody had like fancy investment banking, consulting, all these careers that are way more known now because of the internet. So I think it was just an internal fire. I think what I've discovered is we probably all have this internal fire, this fire to bring forth what is inside us. But that gets hijacked by shiny objects when you're young, right? And so I was in the honors program at the University of Connecticut and just surrounded by people that were like, oh, I'm going to go to this fancy grad school. Oh, this is the best job and company to apply for. You then get in the fancy job internship and then you find out there are better inner rings, right? I remember finding out about Bain and Company at GE because Bain was consulting the CEO, and the guy next to me, he was a business school grad. He's like, that's like the job. And I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. I went to their website. They get to work on cool problems with C-level instead of like manager level. And it's like, ooh, that's really interesting. And I actually liked business and I had a hunch I would like that. But I just desperately wanted to be in that. And then people would tell me, you can't work in these companies. You went to the wrong school, you fool.
Mhm.
And that just motivated me more. And I think, I mean, just being an insecure young man, you're looking for ways to prove you. And what better way to try and prove yourself than the job market?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. And when I hear about, like, I love this term, the world-class hoop jumper, because I think too, from even like the like immigrant perspective, like if you're first or second generation, like us and a lot of our listeners, when I think about that, I think that for us, we're like, oh, we're so happy we can play the game now. You know, we're like in it.
Mhm.
We can compete with these people. We can like try our best. And then it's like, once again, you start to get a taste of that success. The hoop keeps moving. Nobody tells you that.
Mhm.
And then, and then all of a sudden, there's sort of this like guilt or this feeling where you're like, well, I'm so lucky I had this opportunity and now I have this job. And who am I to look at it and say it's like unfulfilling? It feels almost like ungrateful, I feel like sometimes.
Yeah, I think I always had this tension between sort of being happy with what I have and being pushing for the next thing. And I think it got even more heightened when I went to work at McKinsey. So I went from GE, I finally broke into McKinsey on like my third attempt. And I got rejected from all the other firms. So I just happened to get accepted by the top one. I would have worked at John's consulting firm in Western Kentucky if they hired me. But yeah, it was even more heightened at places like McKinsey because these people had been playing the game their entire lives. And looking back now, this makes a lot of sense. But I often was friends with first or second generation immigrants in the workplace. And I think it's because I was an immigrant into prestige culture. I didn't grow up in that.
Yeah.
Right. So if you didn't grow up in that, believing it when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, how do you actually how do you compete with somebody that was like eating that for breakfast? You can't.
Yeah.
You're always a foreigner in this weird world. And that's always how I felt. So I was always hanging out with the weirdos, right? It was the immigrants, it was the outsiders, it was the people that didn't dress right.
Just because we're immigrants doesn't make us weirdos, Paul.
That's true, though.
No, the weirdos and the immigrants and the outsiders. But you are, though. And
Yeah.
And I mean, this is one of the best parts of American culture is it brings in those people and brings out the best in them. But how do those people often thrive? Entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
not in big companies.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah, I never could. People would just be like, just put your head down. You have a good job. Be grateful. Just like, it's like, I don't know. There's got to be more than this.
Yeah.
Not about this life.
It's so true. And I think, ironically, like if you're a good world-class hoop jumper, jump in those hoops for yourself. And maybe not even a business, but just like doing what you want for your own life and making that happen. But I think we're all kind of like scared to do that too. It's interesting because you were pretty far along and you had done really well on the default path. And you expressed having that like dissonance or like that sense that something was off. But like, when do you think you really started to question that path that you were on?
From that first internship at 18, I just didn't have the courage to do anything about it.
Mhm.
I was scared. And I also didn't have anyone around me that had taken different paths. I didn't know entrepreneurship. I didn't have a single soul I knew that had done something like that. I think my uncle had taken a break from work for a couple of years and done his own company, but then like went back to the corporate world. And he always had a little of that energy, but I just didn't have like the active like, oh, Paul, you're wired for this. You should bet on yourself. Go do these things. Even like his script was go work in the corporate world and then you can use that credibility to parlay into doing your own thing. That is the safe way to do it. That is the smart way to do it. So yeah, I was always questioning it and I hadn't found the others in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say things like, why are we like, don't you feel like we shouldn't be working on this stuff? And people would be like, come on, be grateful. This is like an amazing job. You're getting paid good money. I'm like, are we sure? And the funny thing is I read William Dereschwitz's Disadvantages of an Elite Education, his essay in 2011 when I was in business school, in the heart of it. And I really resonated with it. But I don't think I understood why I resonated with it then. I always just had these ideas like, okay, I'm gonna like inject this bold vision of who I can become in the corporate world. End of the day, 6 years later, corporate world 1, Paul 0, right?
Yeah.
I lost, and like I underestimated how powerful the environment is in shaping your behavior, and eventually just ran out of moves and went off to do my own thing.
Yeah, it's funny how I think we're seeing this a lot now where it's like, even when you know it's all a game, like even if you're like, once you like start to see it, you think that's the point where it makes sense. And you're like, perfect.
No, it makes it harder.
It makes it almost more painful.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I guess it could be better. Or this is actually not as meaningful as I thought, or whatever it is, like whatever that disillusionment is for each person. It just makes it a lot more difficult, I think, to pull away. You know, to your point earlier, when you're talking about basically like who are the people who are on the outside versus those who grew up with this idea, we're almost always, like I've always felt like I'm always trying to figure out how to fit in. Like, what's everybody wearing? What's everybody talking about? What's everybody reading? Like, how do I fit into all of this?
Yeah.
And then when you realize there's not a lot of meaning or anything behind it, it's like, wait, but I don't understand. Like, I did everything right. I'm supposed to be fitting in, and maybe I am even, and I don't understand why I'm unsatisfied.
And I think there is a truth to fitting in, right? There is a sense of don't be naive about how the world works.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be wearing a pink t-shirt and a swimsuit to a job. Like, you can't just be yourself. Right? You do need to play the game to get entry into things to like get the rewards you're getting. I think the challenge is if you give up too much of your identity in that, you start to lose track of one, what drove you to enter in the first place, and why you're there and continuing to play the game. So I think what happens is people raise the stakes really high for choosing where to enter into different worlds, but then they don't have high stakes for themselves as they go on. So the decision to go on in a path is essentially, well, what did I do yesterday? I'll do that today, right? Subconsciously. Whereas I love this approach. A friend, Brandon Moore, he's worked full-time for 10 years. And he said his idea was every year I'm renewing my subscription to the company.
Mm.
Frame that way, that sort of changes the behavior. And this links to my broader idea of like where we are in the map. 40 years ago, you have to fit in to get entry into the companies. Companies control access to work and money. Today, that is less and less true. But what that means is everyone's on a pathless path. So if you want to have a career and keep progressing, keep growing, you need to keep moving. You can't sort of have these old scripts about how we orient toward work guiding how you're spending your time. A lot. I kind of riffed in a bunch of different directions, but I'll pause there.
Well, I think it's interesting right now because at least my former industry, tech, is getting ravaged right now.
Yeah.
Tons of layoffs. Over 200,000 people have been laid off. And it's a lot of these like big quote unquote staple companies. And I think a lot of people are having that realization now that this default path wasn't as safe as I expected, wasn't as, even if I do everything right, isn't necessarily looking out for me the way I thought it was when I originally signed up 5-10 years ago.
I think it's confusing, though, because the default path is safer than ever, but in a narrow conception of life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At this point in history, the average knowledge work job in the world of an educated college person, not educated, credentialed college person, is better than ever. The economic rewards are better than ever. The problem is you can't win life on a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
What people were doing in the tech world is cynically trying to solve life on a spreadsheet. I'm going to work at Google because that will help me acquire a lot of wealth in a short period of time. The problem is you compromise your soul. There's soul cost to that, right? And as you get older, you wake up to these things. As you shift out of your 20s and into your 30s, you start to realize, there's a larger game at stake. I'm about to have kids, and kids, spouse, where we live, connected family. We have family in Taiwan. We have family in the US. Like, I'm not just optimizing on work.
Mm-hmm.
there are many different elements. And the thing is, a lot of people's conception is of life as downstream from work. And I just think that is a fundamental error in terms of a starting point for thinking about your life. And I'm only writing for the people that want to potentially think in a different way. I don't want to change people's minds. I just want to like reach people like you two who are hyper curious about living full and good lives.
Yeah. I do think like that first step is just realizing that something's off. And I think it's funny because once you realize, you're like, how does everybody else just like do this forever and like plan to do this forever without like any doubt that this is going to be fine? But then the next step is actually changing things. And I think that's like a whole other level. Like, how did you get to that point where like you were like, I'm actually going to leave my job now?
Yeah, what was the inflection point? Like, what actually pushes you out in the end?
I wrote about this in the book. Like, I don't know. It's hard to know if there's a point. I don't think there was a point. I think it was just awareness. I think it was becoming more connected to my body. It was becoming asking questions and daring to continue to ask them. I think the interesting thing which has happened is I was asking all these questions and people would dismiss me and shut me down. And then I started a website and started writing about these publicly. And I didn't have a very big audience. I had a couple hundred people on my subscriber list, but I opened up my calendar on Wednesdays and I said, anyone in the world can talk to me, just book a call, wide open calendar. And I did that for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
People started telling me these same questions you had. And I go, it's not just me. This is wild, right? This is really cool. I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to listen to these small number of people telling me I'm onto something. And I sense you're probably feeling that with your sabbatical stuff now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like,
oh, yeah.
When certain people find it and they're like, oh boy, like me, like I'm just another reader.
Yeah.
Like, don't put me on a pedestal because I have a big audience. I'm just another curious lost soul that is like, oh, this is really helpful. I hope she keeps writing this stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's not much written about it. But what happened in the pandemic is those hidden conversations that we're having started to come above the surface. And then people started having them in public. And then you're having it with your sister, right? Whereas 5 years ago, you wouldn't even bring it up to your sister. Because there's a certain amount of shame. Oh, I don't have it figured out. I'm a bad person if I'm asking these questions. Maybe you bring it up with your sister because it seems like you're pretty close. But people would tell me before the pandemic, I would say, oh, what does your wife think of this? I haven't told her. I can't talk to her about this, right? He's assuming that he needs to keep working because she's assuming they need a certain expectation of lifestyle. And that stuff's really fraught and hard. Because if people ask the boldest questions in life, they might discover, oh, I'm with the wrong person who doesn't have this vision for life. And I lucked out because I met my spouse after I blew up my life and I was sort of not making any money. But yeah, these questions are fraught, big, and scary.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Paul. It's funny, when I first started writing about like leaving work and taking time off, especially when I feel the same way. Like, I don't really know why I chose to do it. And, I think a couple of things ended up like dominoes just fell and it was a decision I made. So when I wrote about it and reflected on it for the first time, that's when I was like, okay, I think I am starting to process some of this. And then when people started reaching out and when you've shared my stuff, I was like, oh, people can't, like, there are people who are either in a similar place in their life or thinking about this. And I didn't even realize it. Like, I've been surprised by how many people have been like, oh, like, how'd you prepare for a sabbatical? How did you think about this? So now in hindsight, it's not surprising that so many people had reached out to you. But I think it's also cool that you opened up your calendar and were able to talk to so many different people about like this exact stage in your life. Because I do think it is a little bit taboo depending on what like group of people you're around.
Yeah, and it's been cool. I think people have said, hey, your way of thinking about things helped me develop my own way of thinking about these things, right? There are ways to approach these things. For example, when I quit my job, I mentally was thinking, okay, a year. I'll run out of money, my savings in a year. Along the way, I figured out what I wanted. I
Yeah.
wanted to continue on the path. I wanted to create. I wanted to do all these things. I wanted to live more fully. And I doubled down on the path. And it was sort of a renewed commitment every year, right? One of the biggest traps of thinking about our lives is as all or nothing leaps. It's, I need to launch the perfect podcast, right? And then you talk about it and you don't do anything for a couple of years. You can just rename your podcast. This is the fourth name. Oh, this isn't my podcast. I've had 4 names for my podcast. You're about to rename yours, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can just keep evolving. And this is actually how life works.
Yes.
There's this amazing book. I think I have it over here. Yeah, by Bruce Feiler. It's from Aida Alston recommended it to me. It's called Life is in the Transitions. And he breaks down at the beginning of this book, he says, people go through disruption almost constantly throughout their life. And this reframe was so powerful. It's so many things. It's like a health crisis. You lose someone in the family. You get fired at work. You get a promotion at work. It's like positive disruptors too. You change cities. You get married. You have a kid. And it's like, on average, this is happening every 2 years in our lives. So we're constantly evolving and changing. And we sort of look at things like work as, we got to pick the job and the career by age of 25. And then boom, that bucket is done, figured out. Maybe that worked in the 1950s, but I don't even think it worked then. It was just like everyone was colluding to pretend they're not thinking or stressed about these things, right? Well, that bubble's popped. We're all talking about it. It's time to think deeper about these things. And we need better strategies, better approaches, and better life models. The linear path ain't gonna cut it anymore.
Yeah. And when you think about it, it completely makes sense that like as our life changes, our priorities are going to change, our values are going to change. So it's like makes sense that we restructure our lives. But then when you're in it, you feel like this guilt for like not for thinking about that kind of stuff. And then, like, it was really interesting to read about you after you quit your job as well. And, like, just, like, the different stages you go through. Because I feel like especially when I read that, I felt like I saw Michelle go through kind of similar stages where, like, sometimes you're really inspired and sometimes it was kind of like, like, what am I doing? And I think it's kind of nice to know those beforehand, too. Like, what were some, like, unexpected feelings that you had after quitting?
I still have them.
Good to know.
Yesterday, I was just having a down energy day. And like when I have a down energy day, I'm off, my body's off a little and I feel silly sometimes. Like I launched this community, Find the Others, and I'm still doubting that. I'm like, why did I do that? Like, is this silly? Is this selfish? Is this really what I want to be doing? But at this point on my journey, I know that I'm not making rash short-term decisions to escape or quit. And I've learned to sort of like trust the flow of the ups and downs of the journey. And I've had enough of those self-doubts that it's like, okay, I see you thought, right? It's basic mindfulness. I see you thought. I'll let you hang out for a little, but I know you're probably not going to be there tomorrow or after I go for a walk or after I go work out. I felt freaking terrible about myself in the first few years. I don't think I've fully realized it until writing my book.
Yeah.
I would talk to my mom and she would just question me about all these things. It would make me feel so crappy about myself. Like, you selfish fool. And yeah, I stayed small with my writing. I stayed small with my past, stayed small with my ambitions to protect myself. I didn't want to fail boldly, and I didn't want to succeed boldly either. I was scared of both, and I think I stayed too long in that mode, which is why I love just cheering for people at the start of their paths, because I know how much they need it, and I had a few people rooting for me, and it was so valuable to me. Early friends like my friend Jordan, a mentor Noel, my Aunt Debbie, just sending me small pieces of encouragement. It was so helpful. But yeah, I think what I realized is, one, my mom, super supportive, loves me so much, but those are her fears.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to realize when you do something weird or brave or unconventional, you trigger the heck out of other people's fears. I wrote a post about this. Your insecurity is not mine. And it's like, well, don't you worry about retirement? Don't you worry about getting a job again? Don't you want to buy a house one day? Aren't you worried about like college for your kids? Are you going to send your kids to college? Are you going to pay for that? It's like, whoa, you have a lot of insecurities, a lot of fears, a lot of hidden scripts that you have not untangled. And I just say, yeah, I worry about that. And that's it. And people are like, oh, really? You have fears? Yeah, so they sort of project this courage that doesn't exist on you and just try to process their fears through you to defend themselves from having to ask those questions in their life too. Yeah, and the longer you're on the path, you just feel more comfortable in the weirdness and in the uncertainty.
Yeah, I think when I think about the insecurities, I think we all have like different ones, but it's almost like the thing that you're not insecure about is like your superpower. So like if you're not insecure about like kind of not knowing exactly where you're going and maybe like financially you're not like worried about it, even if maybe you don't have enough money, then that's your superpower. You know, you don't have to be like financially independent to go do this. If you feel confident in your ability and you just aren't worried about the finance part of it, then that's your superpower. Or if you're not so worried about having the community, then that's your superpower. And I think if we all like tune into whatever our superpower is, like we can take that leap a little bit easier.
I love that. Will you write about that? And share it?
I agree, Sammie. I don't know where that came from.
Scripted on that.
That's a great idea. But this is what happened with me in the conversations with people. I would say stuff and people would say stuff back to me. Oh, that's interesting. Have you written about that? I want to share it with other people.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of how my path happened, just very slowly over time. But yeah, I think my superpower really is playing long games. And I don't think that skill is not super useful in the corporate world where the incentive structure and how careers happen, like long games actually don't pay off as much as they used to. You can play a long game and win financially in a big company by just sticking it out and climbing the ladder slowly, but you're going to destroy your soul.
Yeah.
I realized early on, I like writing. And everyone just quits. I could probably write a weekly newsletter till I'm dead. And that seems super easy for me. But that's my unfair advantage. So downstream of that, for me, I can go slower than people. I can make more mistakes, spelling errors in my newsletters and stuff. I can delay trying to monetize stuff a lot longer than other people because most people are going to drop away. And then like I'm going to get a following. The dynamics of the internet are a tailwind to me. And I can just hang out and just like keep playing my long game because also I don't desire the status markers that many average Americans do. Me and my wife don't really care about owning a home.
Yeah.
A lot of people in our friend group, that is very important to them. And private school for their kids and nannies. And like, we're going to try and figure it out. But like, we're willing to sacrifice some of that stuff to protect our creative paths.
Yeah, no, owning a home is like one me and Michelle talk about all the time too, because we were kind of debating buying a home here in a little small town and we didn't. And then a radio tower fell on our house and I was like, okay, good thing we didn't buy this house.
You were going to buy that one?
Yeah, the one that I live in. Because it's like, it's a nice house, but you know.
And it was cheap because there was a radio tower on the property.
Renting it is pretty awesome, right?
Right.
You don't have to worry about repairing
all the
radio
damage.
tower.
Yeah.
But yeah, it never goes away either. I see people's houses and I'm like, ooh, my desires kick in, right? But it's being aware of these mimetic desires of desiring what other people want. It's impossible to avoid. But what you can do is just double down on your principles. Name your principles, write them down, declare them to people, publish them in a 220-page book that now 10,000 people have read. It would be really embarrassing if I started like changing my principles. So I kind of like the aspect of sharing in public from that perspective too. But yeah, do I think about owning a home still? Yeah. Would I be open to it? Yeah, but I'm not going to sacrifice. Like, I'm not going to go get a job at Google because I want a home.
Yeah.
If I can do it within the constraints of my path, that I'd be able to live with and do it in interesting ways, yeah, I'd do that too. Another thing people with homes don't do, they never rent out their rooms on Airbnb. They never like do creative things like have a roommate, even if you have a kid. Like you can do these things. And the only reason I'm more comfortable with more flexibility around scripts is because like I've just done a lot of weird stuff over the last 5 years and makes me a lot more comfortable with not doing what other people are doing.
You know, one thing I was thinking with your path is like something we talk a lot about on our podcast is financial independence and the financial independence retire early movement, which you kind of touch a little bit on in your book. But what I really liked about your path is that wasn't necessarily like your path. Like I'm assuming, you know, you said you had like a year, you expected to save enough to last a year, but you weren't like, oh, I need to wait until I'm like retirable to like go do this, which I think was my previous mindset. I was just wondering, like, you obviously kind of know about the movement. Like, what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's super net positive movement. At the core, I always try to take the best voices of any group. The easy thing is to dunk on the worst versions of the FIRE people, which are like reducing life to a spreadsheet and trying to hit a number and orienting your whole life around that. Failure mode. Yeah. The best people in FIRE are really about spend wisely, spend thoughtfully, and sort of question things. It's the same thing I'm doing, is starting from first principles. One of the benefits of earning less money was trying to figure out, okay, how do I allocate my resources, right? Should I spend a little more for these 3 months on a house if it means I'll be more walkable to things like renting a house we rented in Taiwan? We ended up spending more for a 3-bedroom house or apartment in Taipei. And our idea was, okay, we'll have friends from around the island visit us. Turns out like nobody visited us. People end up either getting hotels because they're cheap or we just come up for random times. So it was like, oh, that's an experiment. Scaled that up, learned a little bit. Now we can scale it back down. And continuing to do things like that. So one of the benefits of lowering your income is like figuring out what your actual priorities and values are. I forget, what was the original question?
I was just wondering your thoughts on...
now.
No, I know. You answered it. I was just wondering what your thoughts on FIRE was because I wasn't sure.
Oh, yeah, FIRE. Yeah. So one of the cool things is somebody messaged me a few years on my path and said, it sounds like you're Coast FIRE. So there's this version of... Have you heard of Coast FIRE? Yeah. Coast FIRE is basically you quit and you have like a buffer and you have like a retirement fund that will just like grow. And your goal is just to keep breaking even or better doing work you like. Maybe the doing work you like is my version. But the benefit of me quitting before I was financially independent is I had to make money.
Yeah.
I knew I didn't want a job, so I optimized around my stubbornness. I did not want a job. I didn't want to create a job for myself, so I designed around liking work. So I didn't do things I knew I might resent or not like or want to quit. So I went super slow, did a lot of experiments, and designed around liking work. I am retired now.
Nice.
From coercive employment.
Yes.
Not as catchy.
because I think I can avoid that for the rest of my life now because I have confidence of making money in a bunch of different ways. I am comfortable with not having a fancy upper middle class life, which for some reason has become like the average expectation in the US. I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't need a McMansion in some random suburb. I can avoid employment. I can make enough money to live an average life, and I can flex down my lifestyle to keep it going. And the longer I stay on this path, I learn more skills. And so I'm energized about life. So thinking about retirement is really weird when you like what you do.
Yeah.
Because retirement is an escape script. It has become one. Oh, I'm doing this because 62, I'm going to retire. I won't have to work again. This huge burden's removed from my life. I don't have any burdens in my life. I spent less than 200 to 300 hours last year doing stuff I didn't like. If I could skip it, I would have. But yeah, less than 200 to 300 hours. It's a pretty good life.
That's crazy. Yeah.
That's a very good life.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this. So like I do podcasting, like this might help sell books, but I'm doing this on a Sunday. The ideas of like working on a Sunday would have been crazy to me on my previous path. I avoided it like crazy. That was one of my ideas. I'm never going to work on weekends, never work late. I'm going to make it work. I'm going to do this work-life balance thing. Now we're talking on a Sunday. I love this. This is going to be the highlight of my day.
Agreed. Yeah.
I totally agree. It's funny because I mean, there's so many different parts of like what you said. I think one is like the great irony is a big criticism people actually have of both retirement and FIRE is that people say, well, then you stop working and then what? And I think the thing that people don't realize, and even I didn't realize until I got to this point, was that actually you can start to just do things you want to do and you don't have to work, quote unquote, if you don't want to. But a lot of times if you're doing the things you love, it can attract money. It can attract opportunities that you didn't even know. Like I have opportunities that I didn't know existed that I love to do now. And I don't care. Even our podcast doesn't make money, but like I love to work on it. I love to edit it. I love to talk to people. And it's just totally, it's different. But if I had to like stay at my last job on a Sunday, yeah, I would be mad.
Yeah, and that's often one of the biggest fears that holds people back. What would I do with my time? People say this to me and I'm like, what are you talking about? I could just read books all day. I have so many books around my house. I'm so pumped. Like we're staying in a location for a while because I'm just like buying books to be surrounded by books and reading, and I could do this all day. It's so fun to me.
We talk about that all the time. We're like, people always ask like, well, what would you do? And I'm like, I like have a million things to do.
and you're still working.
I'm
right?
still working. Yeah. Theoretically, I have a million things to do.
And no, but that's great, right? The thing is, like, I wasn't able to keep the hunger for like my passions alive in a job. And I think the thing that scared me, like if there's any moment, there was probably a deep knowing inside of me that was like, this flame might get extinguished.
Yeah.
You might become like a cynical, grumpy old person. And this is why sabbaticals are awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we recorded an epic episode with Michelle and another friend, Cecile, who's it should be out on my podcast in a couple of weeks. So all you listeners, you don't have to subscribe to my podcast, but definitely listen to that one. You guys can even reshare it on your feed if you want. Free for the world to consume.
Yes, definitely listen to it. If you're my friend,
good.
listen to it. Just kidding.
Yeah. No, it's very good. You guys dropped a lot of wisdom beyond what I've even thought about for sabbaticals. But the thing that almost happens in a universal sense is a month to 3 months into disconnecting from work is the central way of orienting towards life, is you start remembering forgotten hobbies. You realize, oh, I do have a creative impulse. Your desire and imagination for things you can do in the world starts expanding. You're like, oh, I could garden, I could volunteer, I can just show up places and help people. And noticing like that is something within you. Once you've had this sabbatical or this break, or you're able to be aware of it in a job, which like I love that you still have that. A lot of people struggle with that. Just notice like, if that flame, that fire is in danger of being extinguished, that is when to blow up things.
Yeah.
And I sense like what keeps you on the path, Michelle, is that you're like, wow, this stance, this mode of life is so amazing. It feels true. It feels real. It feels like your life matters. And it doesn't come with a paycheck yet. But I guarantee if you had to turn it on, you have the sense that it's there.
Yeah, it's so true.
But you're willing to fight for it, right? Now? To like
Oh, my
protect that
gosh.
mode of life.
I mean, that's why we're in, why I'm in a small town with Sammie, like
Yeah.
it's part of it is making the decisions of, okay, how do I extend this? How can I keep doing this? Even how can I stop myself from monetizing earlier than I want to is something that I think a lot.
Yeah, because there's a danger of monetizing the wrong stuff too early, right?
Yes.
That's just creating a job for yourself. You could probably create a job for yourself doing something pretty quick.
100%.
Most people who've worked a couple of years in the workforce could do that. They just are scared.
Yeah.
The real challenge is finding the work worth doing over the long term. And that's really hard. I don't have perfect answers for it, but I have like some things I've tried and people have found that useful.
I really, really agree with that. I think even if you enjoy your work and like you said, you feel that fire just starting to flicker, I think the thing I found most surprising was as soon as I left my job, I was like, everything I'm going to do is to make sure I don't go back to that. I would be so upset if I had to go back to sales, all of that. And I actually feel
You're
a little
willing
bit...
to fight, right?
Yeah, I'm willing to fight for it. And then now I've come full circle where I'm like, well, if I had to and that meant that I could support this life, I also would. I hope I don't have to. I don't think I'll have to. But
Same.
I feel like weirdly more okay with it. I think I'm just like, yeah, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And now I have a little bit more faith. I can do some of these other things. And again, like, I don't think I'll have to, but I think taking the break was a big step and being like, okay, there are some things that I like about it. There are some things I'm applying to my current life. And I was burnt out, stressed, filled with anxiety, and it like wasn't healthy for me at that period of time.
Yeah, now you know what's at stake. Let's say you get joy from this podcast, right? And you suddenly go back to a job and your desire to do the podcast fades away. That would probably scare the crap out of you.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you'd be like, well, what is wrong? Changes need to happen, right? Because you've done 100. Anyone that does 100 of something probably likes what they're doing. This is like one of the greatest hacks of creative stuff. Just do 100 of it and then figure out what you're doing. But yeah, and you'd probably be more aggressive in making moves to reignite that fire or just walk away again because you already walked away for a couple of years. You're fine.
Yeah. Walking away, you realize it's okay. Like you think the world will crash, your skills will be completely useless. And it's like, no, you'll make money somehow.
There's also this deep thing that a lot of people don't talk about, which is the dating world of like men especially think that their value is going to be destroyed if they're not making an income, right?
Yeah.
That is true to a point. But I think it's true for anyone, like especially in the US, like men and women both sort of define themselves by their career. And we look at people who don't have a career or aren't working with suspicion, right? But one of the most attractive things in the world is somebody who is boldly living out their life. And you attract incredible people when that happens. Like, I don't think my wife would have been interested in me if I was on my previous path because I would have been bullshitting.
Yeah.
And you've gotten to know her, Michelle. She's just somebody that cares about like raw vulnerability and honesty. And
yeah,
I wasn't making any money. She jokes that she was buying low when we met. But I think I didn't have anything to hide. I was just being myself. And so that holds a lot of people back too because of what will people say? What will people think? It's like, well, maybe it will help you segment better and find better people to connect with that will believe in your journey and that want to go on a more interesting ride through life.
Yeah, I think one of the underrated things that you mentioned in your book that really resonated with me is at one point you say, before you met Angie, that you had just... Basically, you're like, I'm going to be the cool uncle, put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
And I almost had a very similar thought. Not so much the cool aunt thing, but I had a thought when I decided to leave my work because I do agree. I think this tends to happen to men, but I think I value it so much too. And I think a lot of women do now as well.
Definitely.
And culturally, we come from a very matriarchal group of people. So I've always seen like women in my family like work and take care of the family. But I was like, well, I'm probably just not going to date like because I'm moving back home. I did sort of feel like how could I date people if I don't have a job? Which is funny because I don't think men care about that at all. But it felt like that to me. Like I did start to feel that, and I resonated when you said that.
Some men do, but you probably it's good you're self-sorting them out.
Yeah. No, it's like when you're more authentic, you attract people who more authentically like you.
I was surprised too. I also just think as I became, I don't know, I almost feel like the same faith I started to feel in my like trajectory. I started to just feel all over in my life. And it's been like an ongoing joke with us. Because when you get to a certain age and a lot of your friends are in healthcare, They don't love to hear that you don't have a plan, but you want to have kids. I had 3 people mention the word advanced maternal age to me this weekend.
How old are you?
32.
Oh, you're fine.
Sammy's like, she's not fine, but
No, she's fine. We talked about it, and I've changed my ways.
but I'm not overly concerned about it, but I have like this same faith all of a sudden that like I'll find like if there's a person out there that's like a good match for me, that I'll find them. And if I'm meant to have kids, I'll have kids. And I don't know. I wasn't expecting that transition to happen also in like the last couple of years. And it feels crazy. And I almost feel like I'm attracting more because of it.
Yeah, that's not surprising. I think the same thing happened to me with dating after I quit my job. I attracted like better, cooler people. It was like, what is happening? I have no plan and I don't. And that's the thing. Faith doesn't come with a story that makes sense to most people.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? And having faith is all about releasing control, but you're also opening yourself up to possibility. I was sort of reflecting yesterday. I was sitting down on the couch and looking at my book and sort of reflecting on this last year. And it's like, I don't even know if I wrote my book. Now, what I mean by that is it was such in the flow of my life that there's this really weird element of it that I don't feel like I struggled. I feel like it came out of me. It seems inevitable that it came out of me. I can't really explain it. And there was sort of a like, that, and just reminding myself that's my future as well. I don't know what the future looks like, and it's just going to emerge. I think a lot of people, like, work has its scripts. Here's how life goes. Parenting has that times 10. And I'm having a daughter within the next month or 2.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited because I have this faith. And I feel even more sure than before that things are going to be okay. Like, what greater guide than a daughter?
Yeah.
Like, there's just such a faith that it's going to be okay. Like, I don't need a plan. And not having a plan is actually the best plan because you get more in touch with what your heart's saying, what the world is telling you, and what actually matters in the moment.
It's funny that you bring up having faith because we were literally talking yesterday about like when we talk to you, we want to ask you about having faith because you kind of like describe it in the book. You know, we have a spiritual aspect to our podcast as well. Not necessarily like any particular religion or anything like that, but just this, you know, I think having faith is a big part of it because it's the opposite of this tendency that I know people like me have, which is to control everything. And we think that, you know, if we can control everything, we can make sure things work out perfectly. And the more we can learn to have faith in things, the more we're actually more comfortable. And the more we enjoy life, the more life unfolds in like a way that aligns with us. And we like, it was interesting you brought that up and radical acceptance in your book as well.
Yeah, that book's amazing for it sort of just forces you to reflect on it over and over and over again. And it's a practice. It's not a mindset shift. The biggest lie in the world is thinking we could just change our minds. Not possible.
I was hoping for
that. You can change your environment. You can practice things. You can do things like that. But there's no like change your mind button. Doesn't work that way. You got to try new things. You got to expose yourself to hard things. You got to go through challenges and crises and ups and downs and all sorts of things like that. But you really can get to the place where you trust. And trusting means bad things might happen too. Life is not in straight up to the right trajectory. It's faith of knowing that you will have the wisdom and resources to adapt. And like reading history is good for this too, because we are so spoiled in the modern world.
So true.
Yeah.
And we lose track of that because we distract ourselves with the crisis of the moment or bad thing of this week. There's plenty of bad things, but the world has gotten better. Maybe it's gotten weirder, but that's a different thing.
Paul, I think that's a great note to end on. I love that message. It really, really resonates with me. And I think the biggest of all the things that you've spoken about and written about, that's like the really key like through line, I think, that I have found and was happy somebody can articulate. And I hope I can articulate one day too, is just this idea that sometimes you do kind of have to let go. And I think it happens because, at least in my experience and like my exposure more to like more concepts around like confidence, I think part of it is once you start to see it work, then it helps. You kind of go in blindly and you're like, okay, I hope this works. And then as like things start to fall in place and like even the good and the bad start to have this like relationship in your life, for me, that's when I started to see, I was like, oh, like even the things that I could dream of were limited dreams. And if I like open myself up and I start to just align my values, think about what's important to me and do the things that really bring me joy, I have faith that this is going to lead me to the thing that it needs to lead me to. And it makes the journey so much more worthwhile as well.
That's awesome. I forgot Angie wanted me to ask you on the time I interviewed you, how do you say so chill on this path? That was her question. But it sounds
chill.
like
that's her superpower.
Yeah. I think that's one of mine too. So maybe that's just like our genetic setting.
I do. It's funny because when you were, we were talking about like the superpower and like the chillness, and I was thinking how mine also can be sort of a negative sometimes in like the corporate environment or even when like in school.
They're like, you're not serious enough. You don't care enough. I'm like, oh,
I'm like, this doesn't matter. That's why I don't care. I remember having a conversation once with my manager when like my second manager and like when things were really even like, I was anxious at work because like things weren't going well and like the writing was on the table and people were disappearing. And I was just talking to him and he was like, and this was in the middle of COVID too. So like my sister's a PA, my mom's a nurse. Like I just have all this perspective. And he just goes, this job is really stressful. And I go, it's not. Nobody dies.
But I think it's stressful because ultimately a lot of people are doing things that are disconnected from what they care about. Yes. And that anxiety is actually way worse.
Yes. And that was the realization for me. I was like, I'm working so hard and I care so much about this. And I also don't. Like, I was like, I just don't value this. I don't, like, I get that to somebody this product is important, but like, it's not doing it for me. And that's when I was like, maybe if I applied this to things that I like, I can actually make something of it. And so I think once I moved out of that environment and I took a couple months to get my like mental health in order again, it's like you said, like once I just like got a taste of the other side and I saw that it can work out, I'll do whatever I can to line it up so that I could keep going on this path because I'm much happier and I can stay at this like chill baseline.
I love that.
Well, Paul, if people do want to listen to all of the other great ideas you have, people interview, what are some of the things that you're working on right now where people can find you?
I think either my newsletter or my podcast, boundless.substack.com. Google my name. I'm the only one with a web presence. Or check out my podcast. I think like my guests are amazing. And I really care about highlighting their stories. And there's probably a little more depth and good energy on the podcast so that those could be good places. But also just rooting for both of you. I think it's super important. I think one thing that shocked me is how few of these kind of stories are being told. I love that you both are doing this podcast, and Michelle with your writing and Sammie's forthcoming writing. But yeah, I think it's important. There needs to be people that don't look like me from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different upbringings that are sharing their story too. And I am pumped to share those stories as well. So definitely keep going, both of you, rooting for you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you.
Listeners, definitely check out his book. We touched on some of the topics here, but like if you want a deep dive in Paul's story, which is super inspiring, it's changed some things that I think about and like some of my trajectories. So definitely check it out. The Pathless Path. You can find it, I think, everywhere. And there's an audiobook too. Everywhere. So yeah. So definitely check that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the encouragement. Thanks for supporting us. Thanks for calling out a lot of voices out there, a lot of female voices out there. Like, honestly, I think it does make a huge difference to have just like someone out there rooting us on. And I think so many people feel that way with you. So I definitely want to say thank you for that. And thank you for coming on our podcast today.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Takeaways.
This is Sammie.
And Michelle. And we wanted to chat with you a little bit about some takeaways that we had from our interview with Paul, which, Sammie, I really enjoyed.
I really, really enjoyed the interview with Paul. I loved the book, Pathless Path. I don't know if I've fully described it in this podcast, but, my student loans are going to be done in 2 years. And I was always thinking, like, at that time, I'll either, like, maybe not work or work part-time. And my hope was to be, like, pretty close to my financial independence goal. And after reading Pathless Path, Paul really inspired me that I don't have to have all the money I'll ever need in my life to stop working or to work part-time. And so for me, I actually think it was like quite a life-changing book. And just talking to Paul and getting his perspective, I just really realized how much his faith and just like having confidence that everything's going to be okay really guides him.
Yeah, I agree, Sammie. I definitely recommend Pathless Path. And if you are listening to this, Paul has generously agreed to send 5 books to 5 of our listeners, which we're so excited about because we would love for you guys to read it. So send us an email and we will take the first 5 people and we will send you the Pathless Path.
Yes. Send us an email with your address saying that you want the book and we will be getting you, thanks to Paul, a copy of the Pathless Path.
Very exciting. So that being said, Sammie, what do you think your big takeaways from this conversation?
You know what it is? And I kind of alluded to this before. It is to have faith. And having faith means just having trust and confidence that I have the ability to handle any situation that comes up, and I have the wisdom to handle any situation that comes up, and that I should just trust myself in whatever path I want to go on.
I love that, Sammie. And I think part of that, like one thing I like that Paul emphasized a few times is that there is a lot of self-doubt. There are good moments. There are bad moments. We worry about things. Like none of that necessarily goes away. But at the same time, that's not necessarily a reason to not go and find your highest excitement. So if that means you can do it within your job, if that means taking a little bit of time off, if that means leaving the corporate world completely, find what feels true to you, but also trust that like internal compass inside of you is guiding you to the right place. I think that's something that I found in my own experience. And the thing that I really, really like about Paul's message is that have little faith, let the world show you that things will be okay, that you can handle the things that come, because they're going to come regardless, good or bad. And let go a little bit. It's a tough one, but I think it's a great takeaway.
Yeah, and honestly, you and Paul both, you really live this idea that I have that if you move in the direction of what excites you the most, like if you move in the direction of what you are the most inspired by, that's going to work. Like that's going to be where you find more and more things to do that resonate with you. And I think you both can capture that.
Yeah, the big learning I feel like we both had is that the opportunities are abundant. There's plenty of space for everybody on the pathless path. And it's a beautiful place to be. And it can mean anything for you specifically. It depends on your values. It depends on what aligns for you. But if we all go and we go work towards our highest excitement, I think the world will be a better place.
I agree. And I also thought it was funny that Angie had asked him to ask you how you stay so chill. Because Michelle is very chill. It's very true. And I think we kind of make a great like combo together because like she has a super chillness and I have the super like OCD-ness and like we balance each other out. And I think we really work well together in that way. And we both have like, most importantly, first things first, respect for each other. But it's funny about the chill thing because I was thinking about how I'm always joking to my mom these days. And I'm like, Michelle's getting famous for not working. Like literally she's getting famous for not doing anything.
Well, it was so funny when you said that that's, the thing that like sticks out is your superpower, the thing that comes easiest, the thing that you're not insecure about. And I think it's funny, like, I think that is the thing that's been attracting people to me and my writing and my story, is that for me, it comes very naturally to, once I've like made the decision to let go, to then let things play out the way they do. And I don't know where that comes from. I feel like I've always had that in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just one of those things. I don't think we all have like certain, what's the word? Like proclivities? Yes, that word.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just mine. Like, it's not something I think you need to fake or you have to fake, but it's the one that I'm like, I don't know, it's satisfying now that that's like actually a good thing. I do think it was like not good when I was like in the corporate workplace.
And I love that too, because I think you moving into this space where you're doing the things that you love, it's actually utilizing your chillness as your superpower. And that is what it is. And it's inspirational to other people. And I think the reason people they seek you and they want to get information from you is because they see you on this path, but also enjoying yourself, also chill, also relaxed. And they want to know, like, you know, how do you get that spirit, or even just to like observe the spirit is. And I think it's really inspirational to people.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's what I liked so much about Paul, and like the things that he writes about and the things that he talks about. And the fact that part of that for him is encouraging so many other people. You know, I think that's something that's hard to capture in a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if people ever say this stuff about themselves, but Paul is just such an encouraging figure. He is so supportive of like so many different people out there, so many diverse people. And he just like hears a message that resonates, and he's like open and willing to do anything to help that person grow. And I love that energy. Like, I think that's what I really aspire to. And so that's one of the things that I really appreciate him, and even to him taking the time to come on the podcast with us today.
Agreed. He's such a giver, and it is inspirational because, you know, he sees things that he likes out there in the world, and he puts some sort of energy to like help grow that. And that was inspirational for me too, because it reminds me that that's what I want to do too.
Mm-hmm. It's an abundance mindset too. Like this idea that people who are in this space with me, like all of us can grow, and that's better for everybody. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Once again, email us. First 5 people, we'll hook you up with a book. And otherwise, we'll catch you next week. Bye.